right now we are doing the 5th plenary panel, Domestic Issues. I will be your co-chair, Kat McNeal, with the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. I am co-chairing with Jessica Schwartz from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Do you want to introduce yourself, or are you good?
That's fine.
All right, and up first are, it's going to be the same deal as last time. Each speaker is going to have 8 minutes. And up first is Ralph Poynter, who will discuss the case of Lynn Stewart, people's attorney, political prisoner. So, all right, everybody please get it up for Ralph Poynter.
Okay, thank you. Before I say anything about Lynn Stewart, I have to say thank you for all of the people here and everywhere who made it possible for Lynn Stewart to get out of the death camp in Fort Worth, Texas. Thank you. Next. And shortly before she transitioned, she looked over to me one morning and said, "We beat them." When she was deep in the heart of Texas, in that death camp called Carswell Federal Prison, and on a visit she looked at me and said, "Ralph, don't let me die here in this place." She says, "I want to die in a place that is familiar, where I'm loved, and that is home." And with the help of, I see people here, brings tears to my eyes, Jeff sitting in the front row, Betty, so many of you brought Lynn home. And she says, "I see the magnolia bush beginning to bloom. I hear the voices of children in the street. We won." And so now, why did so many people step up to help Lynn Stewart? Well, if you've been in this conference all day, you know why. Because as people were speaking, and it started out with the Congo and the liberation of women and gay rights, etc., Lynn was a part of every political progressive movement that was around that she could reach out to in her time. Not just something way out there. She was deep into the struggles. And I wanted to get up and talk to the young man about the Congo, probably before he was born, when people in America were supporting the revolution against Mobutu, when it was against the law, when doctors and lawyers and people were raising funds and not paying their mortgage to support that revolutionary struggle. Lynn was in the mix. And gay rights, Lynn was one of the originals. And I can name all of the rest of the struggles. So what does Lynn Stewart mean here? She means what we're talking about. We can't be a member of one struggle. We have to be a member of all of the struggles for justice. And I remember giving a presentation in Florida once, and I was talking about Sister Lynn this and Sister Lynn that, and then after the presentation, there was a film. And then after the film, somebody raised their hand, a woman in the back says, "Ralph, you keep talking about Sister Lynn. Isn't she white?" And I says, "Yes, she's white in skin, but she is blacker in persona and political viewpoint than 99% of the black people I know." And that brings me to political prisoners. Don't let me die in this place. Well, the political prisoners are the people who knew what we were talking about 50 years ago, and they acted upon it. And they are suffering in the death camps. And the question is, why can we not mobilize the type of struggle to get them out, the same way we did Lynn. Well, Lynn knew the answer from day one. And she says, Ralph, I have a different hill to climb than they do. I'm white and a woman. Makes your job easier. Go out and mobilize. But the people who knew and understood and raised a fist against this gargantuan evil that we call America, the Black Liberation Movement. These are the guys who are in jail. 30, 40, 50 years have served their time, and nobody notices. No one knows their names. And I heard the woman talking yesterday about teaching black children about the history of struggle in this country. And I love Denmark, V.C. Prozer, all of the great guys, and Nat Turner who fought. Teach those children about our heroes today and now who are in the death camps. This is where it has to go, because our young children have guns, but they don't know who to use them against. They use them against each other, but we have to teach them who the enemy is. And understand, while I was in Texas in that terrible situation with Lynn in prison, it was arbitrary. You would travel 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles, drive your car all night, get in line to visit your relative in jail, and they would decide, 5 people go in this morning. So you would miss a half a day, 3/4 of a day. Sometimes you could stay overnight in the car. Sometimes you couldn't. I was fortunate I could stay because of you out there. Many of you helped me by giving me money to go and stay in a hotel or motel until a visiting time. And so I vowed to never be less than 1. When they opened up the doors, my car was first. And I would get to the prison 4 a.m. in the morning. And this takes me to my story. I'll conclude with this. And what would I do Saturday night, Sunday morning, get there 4 a.m. Sunday morning? I would wait, I would watch the deer and the raccoon roam until it was time to go into prison. But before that, I'd turn on the gospel music station, because I love gospel music, in Dallas, Texas. And one morning I turned it on, and there was no music, but there was a minister who had had a program for 26 years, and the program was about get yourself a gun. He had 2 owners of gun stores telling people how they could get a gun and learn how to use it because of white racism in Texas. And the program was filled. There was no music at all. And so I turned to the next station of gospel music, the same thing. And I says, there is a sea change in what's happening in the black community. Now, we know that the political leaders of the black community, as Glenn Ford calls them, the Miss Leadership class, was 1,000% behind Hillary. You couldn't even suggest anything else. They would dismiss you. Oh, I've been tapped. But there's another community out there 5 years before the 2 young men shot the police. And it is growing. Fear not. Every movement in the world that brought about change was violent. And I'm not asking you to be violent. What I'm saying is those who were not afraid to carry a gun and carry guns and fought the police must be supported. And as Lynn Stewart said, no people can call themselves a movement unless they free their political prisoners. We must begin freeing our political prisoners. We can do it. And with Lynn Stewart, you cannot call yourself a movement. And I say you're a racist, but Lynn says no. She says, I have a different hill to climb. I'm white, I'm a woman, I've been in the movement for 50 years. It's easy to organize for me. Well, it wasn't easy. We did get her out. We have to do better. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, up next we have Dave Schneider, who is an organizer and co-founder of the Jacksonville Progressive Coalition, speaking on the Jax 5.
All right. All right, I know this is going to eat into my time, but I want to do it anyway. So, no justice, no peace, people power over the police. No justice, no peace. People power over the police. No justice, no peace. People power over the police. No justice.
No peace.
People power over. And that's the chant that we've got to keep saying in light of the travesty that happened yesterday up in Minneapolis, in light of the rampant police crimes happening all across this country. I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about one such police crime that took place in the city I live in, Jacksonville, Florida, that I call home, about 2 months ago, and it actually had a happy ending in this case. And I think, hopefully it's the type of thing that maybe we can draw some lessons from and apply to our organizing. So, just so you all know, my name is Dave Schneider. I'm a Teamster shop steward at UPS in Jacksonville. Most of what I do right now is involved in union organizing. But I became an activist and a socialist about 11 years ago in opposition to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it's great being here with you all today and to still be involved in this part of the movement. So, our story begins on April 7th, which was the day after President Donald Trump launched military strikes on Syria. It was 2 days after my 27th birthday. And right when me and my girlfriend standing in line at the grocery store gotten word that the missiles had been fired, we decided we're going to organize an emergency protest. We did for the next day, in just less than 24-hour turnaround. We had a fairly small protest and a decent size for Jacksonville, I would say, but there was one thing that was very different about this one, which is that we were attacked at this event, demanding, U.S. hands off Syria, hands off Korea. We were attacked by a very small gang of white supremacist losers who had been coming out for weeks to troll different events all throughout town. These people were armed. They were, ugly and terrible and aggressive and getting up in people's faces. We were attacked by them, and the cops refused to intervene, even when they were asked by other people. Now, eventually the cops did intervene, but it was not to stop the white supremacists, the white nationalists, the Nazis who were out there pushing us around, disrupting our anti-war protest. No, when they intervened, they beat the hell out of 4 activists. They beat the hell first out of Connell Crooms, deaf black man, co-worker of mine at UPS. They beat him so hard that his ear implant that enables him to hear even just a little bit popped out of his ear. They tased him in his back. He passed out and had to be hospitalized. Now, watching all of this take place, Christina Kittle, another great friend of mine, a queer black woman, major advocate for victims of police crimes and sexual assault in Jacksonville. Christina, who'd just been in Selma, Alabama, and talked to Eric Garner's mother, she basically thought about what Eric Garner's mother had said to her, which is basically like, look, I'm happy people filmed what was happening, but a lot of people stood there with cameras and the cops still killed Eric Garner. And you can't get that life back. And if somebody had intervened, maybe he wouldn't have died. So Christina, Toma Beckham, and Willie Wilder seen Connell getting beat by 6 officers, getting tased, thinking that his life was in jeopardy, intervened, not violently, not unprovoked, but to try and save Connell's life in defense of him. And so, they tapped these cops on the shoulder and tried to pull them off. Of course, it turned into a beatdown, just one of the most brutal things I'd ever witnessed up close. About 5 minutes after the melee stopped, I was arrested for organizing the protest and charged with 3rd-degree felony of inciting a riot, which in Florida carries a 10-year prison sentence if you're found guilty. Try to explain that one to my parents, yeah. But, based on the whole action and this just horrendous events that happened that day, You know, I could kind of go through the mass campaign that we developed, which was extraordinary. I could go through the countless sacrifices of Jacksonville activists. I could go through all the just, you know, incredible amount of organizing that we did to make victory a reality. But instead, I'm just going to kind of give you some lessons, and I'm going to encourage you to pick up this piece that we have at our Freedom Road Socialist Organization table that lays out the campaign a little bit more in full. Just a couple of quick lessons. First off, after we'd gotten everybody out of jail, and by the way, our bails were set at ridiculous levels, like $150,000 was our combined bail. We raised that money because of activists much like yourselves in less than 24 hours, and everybody was home less than 24 hours sleeping in their own bed after those arrests. It was phenomenal. But, you know, immediately upon getting back, you know, it suddenly became a question of strategy. You know, what are we going to do to get these charges dropped, these ludicrous felony charges that have been dropped on the people who were victimized by police brutality and victimized by false arrest? First off, we did a class analysis of where we were in Jacksonville. This is indispensable. It was indispensable to our whole strategy. It was looking at the power players in Jacksonville, their relations to one another, who our enemies were, and what sort of leverage we might have over them. So the state attorney, brand new, Melissa Nelson, had just come in after Angela Corey, who some of y'all might know Angela Corey as the woman who botched the prosecution of George Zimmerman, who tried to give Marissa Alexander 60 years in prison. You know, that state attorney, we actually, in the Jacksonville activist community, we spent 2.5 years getting her out of office. This new state attorney, less than 4 months in, did not have the same loyalty to the police and to their wicked agenda. And so we saw an opportunity to drive a schism between the cops and between Nelson. Nelson had a political career. She's an opportunist, of course. She hopes to build on this. And so we said, look, what we're going to do instead, we're going to go and hit the cops hard for the crime that they committed, and we're going to tell Nelson that you have every opportunity to turn the page on this shameful legacy of Angela Corey. We did that because we analyzed the position, and we crafted a strategy based off of that. So, you know, that's lesson one. This class analysis is absolutely essential. Two is that we united all who could be united. The Jacksonville Progressive Coalition, which is the group that I founded and work with in large part in Jacksonville, we've supported countless victims of police crimes. Their families came out. Selwyn Hall, an African-American man, was gunned down about 2 weeks after the Hemming Park melee that we were all involved in. He was gunned down, unarmed by police. We reached out to his family, and they actually came out to a May 1st demonstration, 250 people out in front of the Duval County Courthouse, calling for justice for the Jacks 5, justice for Selwyn Hall, and justice for all victims of police crimes. It's a beautiful moment. And, you know, lots of people wanted to help our campaign, and, you know, I mean, it's got to the point where it was like, hell, let's just let 1,000 flowers bloom, and we'll have the art community and students and, you know, people who gather petitions, and it's great. You know, and so we united all who could be united. And third, and I'm going to wrap up right here, we won because we projected a vision that other people could tap into. We projected a vision that people could draw inspiration from, and we've now got an unprecedented movement demanding community control of the police. We are pushing forward this proposal called JPAC, the Jacksonville Police Accountability Council. I'm not going to go through all of it right now because my time's up. But the point is, we won and we defeated police repression because we built a strong movement that united all who could be united, and we projected a vision of a better world that people could buy into. And damn it, we're going to win that JPAC, and we're going to tear down this oppressive system, and we're going to have victory and power to the people. Thank you all so much.
All right, that was, of course, Dave Schneider of the Jacksonville Progressive Coalition.
Next up, we have Mark Burton, who is the attorney representing Colombian political prisoner Simone Trinidad.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank UNAC for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak to you about my client, Simone Trinidad. Also, if I have time, I want to talk about another client of mine. Her name is Sonia, and she's in the same prison that Lynn Stewart was in. So if I have time, I'll talk about that as well. And my brother Ralph here spoke about death camps, and both these people are in U.S. death camps. But the story really starts back, goes back to the mountains and forests of Colombia into their civil war. Simone Trinidad, he was actually from fairly well-to-do family, but always from a very progressive, well-to-do family. During the 1980s, he became fascinated by a peace process that was going on, and it was called the La Uribe peace process between the Colombian government and the FARC. He got so fascinated, he joined a party that was sponsored by the FARC that was supposed to settle the conflict at that time called the Unión Patriótica, and became very active in local politics in the Caribbean region where he lived. Unfortunately, due to the success of the Unión Patriótica, where they did surprisingly well in some elections, the right-wing death squads, which are backed up by the Colombian oligarchy, and believe me, backed up by the US government, began a series of assassinations. And they assassinated approximately 4,000 members of this party, including presidential candidates and others. And Simon's, his birth name is Ricardo Palmera, but he goes by Simón Trinidad. He knew that they were coming for him. His friends had been assassinated, colleagues had been assassinated, so he decided to he had to either leave the country or he had to go underground. He decided to go underground. He joined the FARC in the 1980s and went into the mountains. Because of his decision, him and his family suffered a tremendous repression. His family had to go into exile. His sister was kidnapped, and his second wife was killed by the Colombian military. He was always a man of peace. He became a key figure in another attempt to have a peace agreement in Colombia called the San Vicente del Caguán talks. He was on television, international person, and became very famous. Those talks collapsed with Plan Colombia, which was a total war against the people of Colombia, initiated by the Colombian government and the U.S. government, by Bill Clinton, and then followed on by the Bushes. However, he wanted to continue with peace, and he went to the country of Ecuador to look for a UN official that he got to know in the peace talks to see if they could start up something again. He was arrested. He was followed by Colombian military intelligence and arrested. He was summarily deported to Colombia, where he stayed for a year in total isolation. There, the Colombian government immediately contacted the U.S. government and said, we want to extradite him to the United States. And the American ambassador says, we don't have any charges. There's no charges in the United States against this man. So they began working on this. Between the Bush and Uribe governments, they cooked up some charges. They added him to a drug indictment in Washington, D.C., and also accused him of being a conspirator with the so-called kidnapping of 3 CIA agents who were captured in combat in the mountains of Colombia when their plane crashed. And so he was, on December 31st, 2004, he was extradited to the United States. He faced drug charges and these kidnapping charges in the Federal District Court of Washington, D.C. Now, he went to trial on the drug charges. They couldn't make him stick. They were ridiculous. He was never convicted, and eventually the U.S. attorney had to go in and dismiss the case against all co-defendants. It was a complete setup. Now, this is an act of war. The U.S. and Colombian governments were using the U.S. judicial system, quote unquote, and extradition as a tool, as a weapon against internal dissent in Colombia. There's also the case of someone called Sonia, who is in Carswell, and she was extradited. Colombian military intelligence brought false evidence against her, and she was convicted of drug charges. And she's now in the Supermax for women in Carswell. And there's a pamphlet out here. We're asking for support for these two prisoners. and I hope you can see that. Sonia's in Texas, and Simon Trinidad is in my home state of Colorado. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 60 years in prison for kidnapping people he never met, he never had any power over. The only thing he agreed to do was to negotiate the prisoner's release by the FARC. And he's been in solitary confinement for 12 years, which it's just due to some legal pressure and some other pressure, it's just been stopped, but he's still in very drastic conditions. He's lived for 12 years in a 7 by 11 concrete cell alone, 23 hours a day. It's called, in any civilized country, that's called torture.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of hope that during the peace process in Havana, which I attended several times, that he would be released. Now, I know for a fact that there was discussions with Obama, and John Kerry actually met with the leadership of the FARC and told them beautiful things, how they're, oh yes, it's all possible, everything's on the table. He's still in prison in Colorado. Okay? Now, this whole process, our criminal injustice system, are using this injustice system against revolutionaries in Latin America. They did it to the Cuban Five. They did it to Oscar Rivera. They did it to many others who I don't have time to name. So what we're asking for is your support. There's going to be a worldwide campaign. Next month, I'm going to be in Spain, Belgium, Switzerland, and Berlin. And we're going to be meeting with congressional European deputies, MPs, members of parliament in Spain, in Switzerland, and in Belgium. So we're asking that you support freedom for these, they're freedom fighters. For Simon Trinidad, particularly for him, because he's got a 6-year sentence. Sonia's only got 14 months left, but she's very isolated and needs your help. And so, we need your support to advocate. We're going to have a worldwide campaign, Colombia, Latin America, Europe, Asia if we can, to free these political prisoners. We need to free these political prisoners from these death camps, and we need to free all our political prisoners in the United States. Thank you.
Okay, and that, of course, was Mark Burton. Next up, we have my co-chair, Jessica Schwartz, who is discussing the case of Razmia Oda.
Hi, I'll only be speaking for 4 minutes, so I'll make this really quick. My name is Jessica Schwartz. I am here as an organizer with the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, just to talk about the case of Razmia Oda real quick. So, as many of you know, in October 2013, Razmia Oda was arrested by the Department of Homeland Security and charged with unlawful procurement of naturalization. In November 2014, she was convicted, and then in March 2015, was sentenced to 18 months prison time and deportation, even though the prosecutor originally asked for 5 to 7 years due to the power of people's organizing managed to lessen the sentence. And then her defense ended up appealing the case, and when the defense ended up trying to appeal the case, this is when repression was really amped up, because at this point, the frame that the prosecution started to go with was that this woman was a terrorist, which, even though she was convicted under torture, under a false confession under torture, and was further released in 1979 in a prisoner exchange. The main reason why I wanted to make an announcement was on August 17th will be her final hearing in Detroit. There is an all-out for Detroit call to action, so any who are able to be there should and defend Razmia Oda. She is essential to the Arab and Muslim communities in Chicago as the Associate Director of the Arab American Action Network, empowering women and children in her community. And I think even though As of right now, she accepted a plea agreement, and so she will still be deported. However, she will not face any prison time, which, even though overall we can agree that this isn't the best outcome, I think it's important to emphasize the small victories made along the way because of people like us in this room organizing to defend Rasmiyah. She became an icon of Palestinian liberation movement and is now known worldwide as an anti-war figure. Some practical victories along the way included getting the first judge on the case exposed as a Zionist, as a financial supporter of Israel, and having to replace a new judge. And we ended up being able to extend her stay in the United States through continuing to fight and through her appeal. And something that's also important to mention is this isn't just an isolated case. Her case is also connected to the Anti-War 23, in which 23 activists from the Midwest were subpoenaed and raided by the FBI. And the same attorney, Barry Jonas, who was in charge of that, was also present when Rasmiyah was in court when she was first arrested. And so we have to understand that even though this was ultimately not the best outcome, we must continue to fight for people like Rasmiyah and Simone Trinidad and others who are being politically repressed, and we have to continue our fight against global imperialism. And just one real quote, a condensed version of a quote that Rasmiyah herself has said, is we can find justice someplace, maybe not in this court, maybe in another place. There is justice in this world and we will find it. We will face injustice and we will have to change this world, not just in this country, in all of the world, in all the places there is no justice. We have to bring justice together, and in spite of everything, we are the stronger people, not the government who is unjust. And so we must continue to fight, we must continue to win, and all out for Rasmiyah in Detroit on August 17th. Thank you.
All right, that was Jessica Schwartz. Thank you very much, Jessica. And next up we have Louis Ling with the Scuffletown Anti-Repression Committee, which is a local organization working to support people arrested protesting Trump's inauguration. All right, Louis, you're up.
On January 20th, thousands of people converged onto Washington, D.C. to protest the inauguration of proto-fascist Donald Trump, and amidst that there were blockades, civil disobedience, blockades of security checkpoints, and at about 10 o'clock in the morning there was an anti-fascist, anti-capitalist march of somewhere in the ballpark of 800 people. And by about 11 o'clock, 230 of those people had been kettled at LN12. They were held without access to food, water, bathrooms, in the rain for up to 8 hours. Many of them, even DC boasts to have a very queer-friendly police force that has special protocols for gender non-conforming people, transgender people. There were gender non-conforming people that were put in zip ties, left in the back of police cars because they didn't know what to do with them. People, while being in police custody in the kettle, were subjected to chemical weapons attacks while they were already in custody, after having the march with no dispersal order, having multiple chemical weapons attacks, lots of pepper spray. There's plenty of video, you can find it. Most people kind of assume that, like the anti-globalization era and anti-war era of the last 15 years of protests, if there was a mass arrest, people would mostly get low-level misdemeanors. When people got out over almost like 36 hours later, every single one of them had a felony riot charge. A few people's charges were dropped. They were mostly legal observers and journalists. There are still a few journalists and legal observers that are facing charges right now. About 3 to 4 months later, a superseding indictment was leveled at the remaining 215 or so. That included anywhere between 7 to 9 felonies total on each individual. That included felony riot, urging to riot, conspiracy to riot, property damage, multiple counts of assaulting an officer, resisting arrest. All of these are felonies. There's no misdemeanors. That's roughly 200 people charged with between 7 and 9 felonies apiece in a mass arrest, which basically the majority of the evidence against them is that they were all on that block in the kettle wearing black. What they were trying to do with these charges is to make people reconsider even the idea that they enter the streets in resistance. These charges, there were windows broken at this march. The estimated damage is less than $50,000. If that gives you any indication into like the small amount of damage while people that were even just in the march or happened to be in the area are currently facing upwards of 70 years in prison. This was also one of the first acts of the Metropolitan Police Department under the Trump administration. It happened within the first hour of him being sworn in. So this case is about more than some people in black breaking windows. This is about people taking the streets in resistance. This sets the tone for all the charges. It's not a coincidence that, like, in many of the protests later across the country regarding airports, regarding immigration, whatever it was, felony riot charges came up in most of those protests in New Orleans and Minneapolis, etc. I just want to emphasize, if you visit defendj20resistance.org, you can find out more. Please talk to me. Thanks.
Okay, that was Louis Ling, everybody. And now, one of the speakers that we had previously skipped over has arrived. So please welcome Afia Nwangaza, the founder and director of the Malcolm X Center for Self-Determination in Greenville, South Carolina. All right, Afia, here you go. Please don't touch it.
I don't know whether to say good evening or good afternoon. Good afternoon. Afternoon makes me feel like I'm not so late. I've been driving around 40 and 440 east and west for the past 2-3 hours. So, as the sister said, my name is Afia Nwangaza. I'm the director of the Malcolm X Center for Self-Determination, WMXP community radio station in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm an old SNCC person. And I originally went to Greenville for the purposes of dealing with doing land loss prevention law because of the theft of black lands in South Carolina, which was ground zero, given the return of the effort from Reconstruction. Reconstruction, they took back a pretty good bit of land that Ulysses Grant issued under Field Order 15, and the remnants is what they were coming back for, and Hilton Head is a monument to that. They kind of brush over that with Nikki Haley's taking down the flag, and the past week, second anniversary of the Mother Emanuel massacre. But the theft of black land continues throughout this country, and in South Carolina in particular. The big fight is on Defusky with no lesser light than Ted Turner. So I went to South Carolina in 1978 for that purpose, and I've continued to work to do community, indigenous leadership development, community development, and cooperative economic development. When the legal services program in Charleston understood that that was what I was about, they decided that they didn't really want to hire me, so I wound up in Greenville, South Carolina instead, and we were able to save a historic landmark, the Working Benevolent State Grand Lodge Temple Building, which was a cooperative effort of Black people from the 5 upstate counties. It was a beneficial organization and provided necessary services to the community, so sophisticated indeed as to actually go to Meharry and Howard and other schools to recruit personnel to provide those services, to build a hotel, and to put the necessary folk in place. So Greenville, like every place else in this country, is in the process of rapid anglicization. I don't call it gentrification because there's nothing gentle about it. And like every place else, a part of that process is hyper-militarization of the cops. So that when Mike Brown was murdered and the prosecutor decided to defend Darren Wilson as opposed to prosecute him, the community was up in arms about what to do about it, but at the same time, fearful of what the impact of any direct action would be. So we organized to participate in the national campaign at 120 on that, I believe it was August 9th. And young people just poured into the streets to the amazement even of myself. And the new police chief showed up because all the cameras were there and shook everybody's hand, and except mine. I refused to shake his hand, of course. And then he nodded to his lieutenant to give everybody a ticket. For pedestrian in the roadway was the charge, which is a misdemeanor, $100 fine. But my position was that, and is, that murderers aren't punished, so protesters shouldn't be punished either. So I refused to pay the fine. So we went back and forth for, I don't know, I guess a little over 2 years until finally, under the rules of the court, they had to either prosecute me or dismiss the case. And my position was, of course, that they should prosecute me. And it was a wonderful community education organizing mechanism. I educated young people on how to run the Malcolm X Center, how to run the radio station, to other adults and seniors to take on other responsibilities and to support them. Other members of the community, elected representatives in particular, were working behind the scenes because they did not want to see a 70-year-old Black woman going to jail for 3 weeks. And the jailer didn't either because he knows that he has all kinds of problems in the jail, and that was just going to be a great opportunity for me to find out what they were and to do something about it. So between the chief judge, the elected officials, the jail, and the jailer, whatever his technical name is, and the sheriff, who is actually the person who's responsible for the jail, and people around in town and around the country calling and emailing and shutting down the switchboard at the magistrate's court, municipal court rather, the city attorney's office, and any place else that anybody could think of. They just started, without even notifying my attorney, they just started notifying callers that the case had been dismissed. And so that they didn't need to call anymore. The disadvantage in that, of course, is that we didn't get to use the trial as a training mechanism and the logical extension, and to challenge the fear of going to jail and using being in jail as an extension, as we have in the past, in the 60s, been able to actually do that. So my time is up, and I'm going to be around for the rest of the conference, so please feel free. Power to the people.
Power to the people. All right, let's just have a quick round of applause for all of our speakers. It looks like our next two aren't going to be able to make it. All right, and thus concludes our 5th plenary panel.